welcome to Crime 11,
Oh,
the show that takes a deep dive into some of the most fascinating and baffling criminal cases in history.
I like it.
This is episode 4, and we're going back to 1993, to a small town in Arkansas called West Memphis, where 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, were found tragically murdered.
Oh, the West Memphis Three. Yeah.
That's right. This crime sent shockwaves through the community, sparked a decades-long controversy,
Yeah.
and still has us asking questions today.
This case is a tangled web of accusations, questionable evidence, and conflicting theories. And what's really fascinating here is how public perception, media attention, and even pop culture played a significant role in shaping the narrative surrounding the West Memphis Three.
So let's set the scene. It's May 5th, 1993. 3 8-year-old boys vanish in West Memphis.
Yeah.
Their bodies are discovered the next day in a drainage ditch in Robin Hood Hills. The details are horrific.
Oh.
Naked, hog-tied, signs of serious
Pretty
injuries.
brutal. Yeah.
So who could do something like this? The police investigation quickly focused on 3 teenagers: Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley Jr. What made them stand out?
Well, they were kind of considered outsiders, into heavy metal music. And Damien especially, he was into the occult, not exactly mainstream stuff in West Memphis. They also had some minor run-ins with the law, petty stuff, but enough to put them on the radar.
Okay, so instead of hard evidence, the prosecution really leaned into these teenagers' image, their taste in music, Damien's fascination with Aleister Crowley, things like that. They were painting a picture of a satanic, ritualistic murder.
The satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. It was this collective freak out about hidden satanic cults, imagined threats lurking everywhere, law enforcement, the media. They all got caught up in it.
Yeah.
Cases like the West Memphis Three almost became morality plays where these outsiders become the villains, whether the evidence fit or not.
So these teenagers are on trial, the media's having a field day, and the fear is palpable. What happens next?
Well, despite the lack of physical evidence directly linking them to the crime scene, all 3 were convicted. Misskelley and Baldwin received life sentences, and Echols, well, he was sentenced to death.
Wow.
Imagine that, the weight of those charges based on, well, honestly, such flimsy evidence.
That's mind-blowing. How could that happen?
You have to remember the context. The satanic panic wasn't just some abstract fear. It influenced investigations, court proceedings, how juries perceived evidence. It played right into existing prejudices about anything seen as different or dark.
Yeah.
These teenagers essentially became scapegoats for a community desperate for answers, a community gripped by fear.
So they're convicted, sent away,
Yeah,
but that's not the end, is it? Doubts start to creep in.
exactly. Remember Jessie Misskelley Jr.? Well, he confessed, but then he recanted, said the police coerced him, and his confession, which, the prosecution really relied on, was full of inconsistencies. Things just didn't match up with the crime scene,
Okay.
and that really started to unravel things. And then there's the DNA evidence that comes later.
That changes everything.
It did. DNA testing, which, wasn't widely available back in '93, eventually excluded the West Memphis Three from all the crime scene evidence, blew their case apart. But it also did something else. It pointed to the possibility of another perpetrator. Someone else's DNA was there.
Someone else. Are you saying the DNA pointed towards someone else, someone potentially closer to the victims?
That's where it gets really intriguing. The DNA they found at the scene, well, it's been linked to Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather, throws a whole new wrench into the case.
Oh, wow. So the evidence that was supposed to bury the West Memphis Three ends up pointing in a completely different direction.
Exactly. And with that, the whole case starts to shift. Public pressure mounts, celebrities and activists get involved, a free car of the West Memphis Three movement takes off, the fight is on. It's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
If not the West Memphis Three, then who?
Yeah. With that DNA evidence pointing away from them and towards someone connected to one of the victims, it's almost like a true crime thriller.
It really is. And, even before that DNA evidence came to light, there were already all these alternative theories swirling around.
Like that Mr. Bojangles, right?
Yeah.
That always seemed a little too strange to be true.
Yeah, but sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Remember how we talked about the inconsistencies at the crime scene, like the lack of blood?
Right.
Well, that detail, along with some witness accounts, led investigators to this mysterious Mr. Bojangles.
Okay, remind me, who is this Mr. Bojangles again?
Picture this. It's the night of the murders, and an employee at a Bojangles restaurant sees this guy acting strangely, covered in blood and mud. He uses the restroom, even leaves traces of blood behind,
Oh, wow.
which the police collected, but then, get this, they lost it.
Wait, seriously, they had potential evidence from this guy and they lost it. That's nuts.
I know, right? This case is full of missteps and lost opportunities. But back to Mr. Bojangles. This sighting happened the same night the boys disappeared. And there's another detail that connects him to the case. Remember Vicky Hutchison, the woman who testified against the teens?
Yeah. Wasn't she the one who claimed she'd attended a satanic gathering with them?
Yes. That was part of her testimony, which she later recanted, saying she was pressured by the police. But before that, she told police that her son, Aaron, who was friends with the victims, had actually seen Michael Moore talking to a man outside of school on the day he disappeared.
Oh, wow. It's getting creepy. What did this man look like?
Aaron described a tall, skinny black man who was trying to get Michael into his car.
And that description, it matches Mr. Bojangles.
It does. Chilling, isn't it? It makes you wonder, what if the police had pursued that lead more aggressively? What if Mr. Bojangles held the key to the whole thing? It's a path not taken, a missed opportunity that could have led to a completely different outcome.
It's like something out of a detective novel.
Right.
A shadowy figure appears on the night of the murders covered in blood and then vanishes without a trace. But he's not the only other suspect who's been looked at, right?
Right. There are others whose potential involvement has been scrutinized over the years. Take John Mark Byers, for instance, Christopher Byers' stepfather.
Oh, yeah, he was kind of a character in those Paradise Lost documentaries.
Understatement. He was known for his erratic behavior and his ever-changing stories. At first, he cooperated with the police, but then turned against them. He even went as far as having all of his teeth removed after suspicions arose about bite marks found on one of the victims.
Hold on. He had all of his teeth pulled. Why would he do that?
It's one of the most bizarre details of the case, and it fueled a lot of speculation. Some people believe he did it to avoid having his dental records compared to those bite marks. Others think it was a desperate attempt to draw attention to himself.
Well, that definitely makes him look suspicious, but is there any real evidence linking him to the murders?
There's no concrete evidence directly connecting him to the crime. His behavior and some of his statements definitely raised eyebrows, though. For example, he gave conflicting accounts about when he'd had his teeth removed, which, didn't really help his credibility.
So he might be an eccentric character with a flair for the dramatic, but there's nothing solid tying him to the crime scene.
Right. He adds another layer of intrigue to an already tangled story, but ultimately his role remains a mystery. There's one more person we need to talk about, though. Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather.
Ah, yes. The man whose DNA was potentially linked to the crime scene. That's got to be pretty damning.
It's a major piece of the puzzle. But the prosecution argued that Hobbs's DNA could have been transferred to the scene innocently.
Innocently? How is that even possible?
They suggested that as Stevie's stepfather, Hobbs's DNA could have been on items belonging to Stevie or present in their home, and those items could have ended up at the crime scene by chance.
I don't know. Seems like a bit of a stretch, but I guess it's possible.
That's the thing about this case, is so many ambiguities. There's evidence that could point to Hobbs's involvement, but there's also a lack of clarity about how that evidence got there.
So we've got Mr. Bojangles, this mysterious figure who vanished. We've got John Mark Byers, the eccentric stepfather with a taste for drama. And then we have Terry Hobbs, whose DNA was found at the crime scene, but whose involvement remains unclear. It's a maze of possibilities.
It really is. Every time we peel back a layer of this case, we find more questions than answers. It's a tangled web of conflicting evidence, changing narratives, and unanswered questions.
A reminder that truth is often elusive, and even when we think we've found it, there might be more to the story than meets the eye. But what about the West Memphis Three? Their story doesn't end with their conviction, does it?
Yeah, so meanwhile, we have these 3 teenagers sitting in prison for a crime they may not have committed. Did anybody believe them?
Well, it's kind of crazy how this case grabbed the public's attention. It became a whole phenomenon. Documentaries, books, even feature films. The West Memphis Three saga was everywhere.
Yeah, those Paradise Lost documentaries, they were so compelling. They really seemed to shift how people viewed this case. Totally. The early media coverage was all about satanic panic and portraying these teens as monsters.
Right.
But Paradise Lost started poking holes in the prosecution's case, raising doubts about the evidence and humanizing the West Memphis Three.
It feels like those documentaries really fueled the Free the West Memphis Three movement.
Oh, absolutely. Celebrities, activists, even some of the victims' families started demanding justice for these guys, for these men who had spent years behind bars. The pressure was really mounting.
And that pressure eventually led to their release in 2011.
Right.
Right. But it wasn't a straightforward exoneration.
Right. They were offered an Alford plea, which is a really unusual, a really complex legal thing.
Yeah.
It allowed them to maintain their innocence, but still plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for their freedom.
So they walked free but weren't actually exonerated. What a bittersweet victory.
Totally. They were finally out of prison, but legally they were still convicted.
Tough. So where does the case stand now? Are they still fighting to clear their names?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They haven't given up hope. They're pushing for more advanced DNA testing on some key pieces of evidence, like those shoelaces used to bind the victims. Technology has come a long way since 1993.
Wow.
And they believe this testing could definitively prove their innocence and maybe even identify the real killer.
Wow. It's amazing that after all this time, they're still fighting for the truth. Makes you wonder, will we ever know for sure who killed those boys in West Memphis? Will they ever get the justice they deserve?
These are the questions that still linger, that haunt this case. The West Memphis Three case really makes you think about how the justice system isn't perfect. It can be swayed by fear, prejudice, even media frenzy. It's a case that challenges us all to think critically about the evidence, to question the stories we're given, and to just never stop searching for the truth.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone from satanic panic to these alternative suspects, from questionable evidence to the complexities of the Alford plea. It's a story that's both fascinating and deeply disturbing.
It really is. It's a story about the resilience of the human spirit, the power of doubt, and how important continuous investigation is.
Well, thanks for joining us on this journey into one of the most perplexing cases in American history. We encourage you to keep digging, keep asking questions, and keep the memory of those three little boys alive. The search for truth and justice should never end.